Today I'm gonna be recreating the very first God of War using the Unreal Engine, but this time it is going to be in first-person perspective, with a full-on combo system and blades that use actual cable-style physics. So let's get started. The first thing I did was grab a Kratos 3D model and the Blades of Chaos, and then pop these guys into Blender. After that, I started working on the character's base skeleton, which is needed for animations. With this setup, I can attach a camera on his noggin and we can have a better idea on how the animations are going to look like. It is not going to be the same exact position, but it is a good enough visual guide while I work on these animations. But before starting on any animations, I wanted to check if claw physics would work for his skirt. So I added the model in Unreal and made the clothing setup. Then I added some basic movement just to see them working in-game with just a T-pose. Kinda looks okay, for the most part, and after that I made some quick animations to walk and run, so we're not stuck on this static position.
Look at this dude.
Okay, so the actual whole idea behind me making this game was that I wanted to do something cool with the Unreal cable system. I already used this on my main game called Sparkmuts. On that game, I added these cables as just hanging pieces on these mobs here, but I wanted to see if this works on something like the chains from the Blades of Chaos. So the animations would have the blades floating in the air, but then inside of the engine I would connect these physics cables. One end on Kratos' hand and the other on the blade. With this physics cable system in place, I can now build some cool combo animations and we can test out this system. On Sparkmuts, I also have a full-on combo system that can link light attacks with heavy attacks. The framework can be used to make really big or even infinite combos and would be perfect for this prototype. So I'm just gonna copy it from myself. And there it is! Now we can link up any combos we need without any limitations. This only has one attack animation, but the system is already there, trust me. After adding that base, I went back to Blender to finish all of the animations for light attacks. I'm gonna try to make it as close to God of War as I can, but some of these animations have Kratos spinning and turning upside down. This won't work in first person, believe me, I tried. At first, these animations were a lot more expressive and there was a lot of head bobbing, and after playing with it for like 15 minutes I got motion sickness. It completely wrecked my entire day. I even checked God of War 3 on that moment where the game goes first person, and yeah, it's not as crazy and very slow to be honest. So I want to make something quicker and snappier than that, but it can't be too crazy otherwise the game is unplayable. To wrap up the light attack combo, I also added some explosion particles and changed how the combo works a bit, compared to the original. For some of these attacks, I actually got inspiration from God of War Ragnarok, with Kratos using the blades as a whip that explodes. One thing I'm gonna make similar though is the notion that you can finish up a combo by pressing triangle. So you can either spam square, or you can press square a couple of times and then wrap up the combo pressing triangle. The finishers are similar, but it's going to get stronger the longer your combo is. These will be considered heavy attacks, and each light attack can be finished with a heavy attack right after. But I also made a full-on heavy attack combo that works on its own. After the full combo was done, I started adding sounds. Initially I was going to record footage from God of War 1 itself, but the audio quality wasn't that good. The good news though is that God of War Ragnarok also has the blades, so I just recorded footage from that. After recording, splicing, and making some audio cues, this was the result. Lastly, I added some of the other base mechanics like dodging and blocking. This was a very basic setup and I'm gonna work on it more after we have some enemies on the screen. And speaking of enemies, let's figure out what we're gonna do about them. So the initial enemies we see are these skeleton type enemies, right? Which is pretty standard for starter enemies on most classic God of War games. So with some reference images, I started sculpting them from scratch in ZBrush. After that base sculpt, I started painting everything. It was looking a bit more cartoony than I wanted, so I brought it over to Substance Painter. There I can use some of the functions built in to give it a more polished look. Basically, I used what I had painted as a base, and added some procedural textures on top of that. After it was all finished, I started working on the bones. You guys probably noticed that I made these enemies with a gap between the hips and the torso. That's because I had this idea of a finisher move where Kratos splits the enemies in half. So the idea is that the T-pose model has the body detached, but using the bones I would be able to put them back together. So with that, I started making all of the animations for the movement. After that was done, I brought the model over with animations to Unreal. Well, the split body part thing is probably not gonna work, because when I join the bones, it looks normal in Blender, but here it looks like this. What I can do, however, is split the model into two parts. Then when the time comes, I can switch the actual character to these body parts, basically making the full character invisible and showing these two parts split with ragdoll physics. Let's first worry about basic functionality though. After fixing all of the animations, I started working on some very basic AI for the enemy. My idea is that if you have like a crowd of enemies, they won't all come to attack you at once, right? They will generally walk from one side to another while looking at you, and then they're gonna take turns trying to hit you, with sometimes more than one at once. So what I ended up doing was a queue system. Picture all of the spawned enemies in a line. The enemy that is attacking you is at the front of the line, and after they finish attacking, they will move to the end of this imaginary queue, and the next one will try to take a swing at you. To make all of this work, I just made a basic enemy manager, which is going to take care of spawning and controlling the queue system. Also, I made a bunch of walking animations in all directions. This way the enemy can face you and walk side to side or backwards. And now that that's set up, I'll make a health component that is going to be used to receive damage both for the enemies and for Kratos. Now when the character's health reaches 0, there's this little death animation with this cool little dissolve effect, just so they won't pop out of existence out of nowhere. Now for the actual finisher move I wanted to make, let's first split the enemy into two separate models. One for the upper body, one for the lower body. Both parts are gonna have their own skeletal structures. This is so we can use physics and ragdoll. Now I can place each part into the enemy character itself, properly positioning where every part should be. Now it's just a matter of turning these two parts invisible, and with a split function we can swap these parts out. This split like that was so cool that I actually changed a bit on how the enemy death happens. Basically, when the enemy's health reaches 0, three things can happen. They will either just execute the death animation, or they can split in half, or they will get stunned. And only when they are stunned is when you can use your finisher move by pressing circle. Now all I had to do was make this animation where Kratos picks the enemy and splits them in half. Also, just so we can have a better idea on when the enemy gets stunned, I'm gonna be recreating the circle button that shows above the enemy's head. It's not just gonna be circle though. Depending on if you are using a keyboard or not, this will either be E or circle. After that, I went back to focus on Kratos, for things like the HUD and the game over systems. For the game over, I made this little animation here where Kratos just falls down, and I thought it was pretty cool, especially with his voice line.
Gods of Olympus have abandoned me.
And lastly, we need a way to recover health, right? Well, I went back to SparkMuts once again to copy some code from the scrap that can drop in the game. It's basically just a bunch of 3D models that calculate a trajectory from spawning into this explosion and then floating back towards you. On this case, it's a bunch of 2D PNGs that float in the air, and when they collide with Kratos, it is going to heal you by a specific amount. I could have used particles, but with this, it is a little bit easier to detect when an orb has made contact with Kratos. And now that we have all of that working, let's finally get started on a level. What I want to do here is just recreate that initial fight scene from the very first game. I have this asset pack here with a huge boat, and some others about a medieval dock, so let's combine these two into the scene. One thing that I thought added a lot to the scene was this basic PNG of the Hydra from the very first game in the background. It is kind of this idea of this distant object interacting with the other ships. And another thing that I wanted to add was this animation where the enemies jump into the boat from the ocean. So I exported the boat's 3D model to Blender and I made the animation there. Then all I had to do was make the enemy play this animation when first loading in. And now that the map was done, the last thing that I wanted to work on was the main menu. I wanted to recreate the main menu from the original game, but now with the newer model of Kratos. One thing that I think was pretty cool from the original was how hard the shadows were on Kratos' face. I added some post-process effects and a hard light above Kratos to try and capture some of that, and this is how it turned out. After that, I just wrapped it up with a game over screen, an in-game pause menu, and a simple high score system. And there we go, game's finished. And here's the final result.
Gods of Olympus have abandoned.
If you want to see more of my stuff, check out my main game called Sparkmuts. It is a game about these intelligent humanoid dogs that live on the back of a giant steampunk dragon. The game is a procedurally generated open-world adventure game that is going to heavily rely on exploration and villages. Subscribe to the channel for more cool projects like this. I'm Leo, signing out.